they kind of create this like wall between the viewer and the world that's going on in the scene.
There's like a merging of timelines happening in a lot of the paintings.
It's almost dreamlike in the nostalgia.
It seems like kind of an inside joke about painting to me.
It's almost like how she used painting, how to use the space, like very performative too, yeah.
A lot of voids happening in a lot of these paintings.
You could film or perform something in front of them.
All right. So, yes, here we are in this major installation of new paintings by Allison Katz. And who are we? I'm Ingrid Schaffner. I'm a curator and a director at Hauser Wirth Gallery.
Just started September.
Just started in September. Joined by my colleague, Eugenia Sevilla, in the learning division at Hauser Wirth. And,
yes, and I'm actually a performance artist. Arakawa Nash.
So there's references near and far, truly, throughout the work. And so maybe can we begin with what you all see in terms of references, pop culture, art historical references. I heard somebody mentioned Magritte at some point, but let's start there.
This is my favorite reference, which I believe is like an 80s advertisement for stockings. And I love the reference of a catwalk and how surreal it is. I think it's fun also like including her initials as like kind of her like self-referential, a stamp in art history in time. And I don't know, I feel like there's just so much, there's so many fun references that it plays with and around in the space.
Just continuing to talk about this one, I'm noticing how large it is compared to like a different sort of editorial image, because it seems like it could be like a magazine sort of image. And I like how her body is fragmented. It's almost violent, sort of like what the product is doing to a woman's body is cutting her into millions of pieces, and it's probably what the fashion industry was doing then and is still doing now. And so it looks kind of violent to me, like violent editorial.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot in this one. And the other thing that I thought of when I saw it was that if this is what this advertisement actually looked like originally, it looks like Muybridge photograph, that there's like this time-lapse element, and it reminds me of like, or just makes me think of trying to capture movement and time within a painting. It seems like kind of a inside joke about painting to me.
Also, what's really fascinating is Allison's obsession with architectural form. So the A is not only just her name, but it's the A, which is a part of an A-frame for housing, building a house for a roof. So this idea of an architectural form, which is a constriction in this case for the female body. And then the veiled allusion to Duchamp's nude descending a staircase, which this idea of movement. But in this case, it's hard to tell how tongue-in-cheek she is with a feminist slant on this. But again, this idea of architecture and female bodies that merge together in both a defiant yet formalist technique is, quite fascinating here.
I first saw her work as a performance artist, actually. When she graduated Columbia University 2008, Allison and Kerstin Brush and Georgia Sagri and Adela Roder did some kind of a feminist critiquing performance collective for several years. So I see a lot of like, how it's almost like how she used painting, how to use the space. Like very performative too, yeah.
When I think about this painting, I see, balconies throughout art history, windows throughout art history. They kind of create this like wall between the viewer and the world that's going on in the scene. And so I see it almost as like a barrier of access, or or just like kind of calling onto that tradition. Specifically, I think of like Rococo paintings of like a woman on a balcony, and it's almost inviting you, but it's also a little bit like teasing because it wants you to come in, but you can't. It doesn't give away too much. And then I love like the site specificity of this piece as well, and that it's literally like right here. Yeah.
And that on the other side of the wall is the painting outside of her studio window too. So there's kind of like almost transparencies between the pictures themselves, layers of transparencies, views onto views. But what else do people see in terms of references? This was good. We got pop culture, we got art history.
I think someone mentioned that this was taken from a photo of when she was like 12 and she was watching a play go on. So I think this is interesting because the subject matter is so different than the other subject matters, which are kind of like taken from like media or like the internet. And this is very like personal. Yeah, I also like the presentation of it and how it's so high up and you're kind of like put into like the artist's shoes, like looking up at this like stage.
I think these are all pretty funny, actually, working together. I mean, this is a hilarious height for this painting to be. And it still seems like a window, like you're in a theater, maybe. And I think all of them are pretty funny, like just the way that the paint is handled, and all of them are very different. Like this is pretty funny to me, too, still. And even the skylight one, I think there's definitely some cheekiness involved in all of this. And especially the way that it is painted, and they're all so differently painted. So
somewhat not really autobiography, not really like kind of playing with autobiography, or not necessarily about herself, but more like about the idea of artist. What do you think?
What do you think about that? An artist making work that has autobiography in it. I think this is Allison on stage, like performing as a kid. Okay. The painting where her signature is the face. So there's very direct insertions of herself in the work, but where the work isn't then personal. Like what seems like an interesting gap. To be using yourself, but then leaving all this other space for things to enter.
I was just going to say, I think this one's really interesting to me because it really evokes, I know it's from a picture, but it really evokes a memory with the warm lighting and kind of like the sun coming in, even though it's on stage. There's no way that there could have been light coming from behind, I'm assuming. So, and I think it's almost, the way I'm interpreting it, is kind of the embarrassment of being in a school play and it being like bad and you wanting to cover up the memory with something. And it's like she transposed something so random over top of it, almost to cover the memory. And so I feel like there is this humor and this wit, and I don't know what the fairy is. It looks really familiar to me. I don't know if it's a reference to something or if it's just another symbol of like nostalgia or memory. But that's how I'm interpreting this work, as a sort of reference to her past and her history. It's almost dreamlike in the nostalgia. And I'm really appreciating the color choice and how it's evoking that.
Yeah, and going off of this idea of memory, like I'm feeling that too. And I think like this painting in particular and a lot of the other ones, I feel like are working on different timelines. Like there's like a merging of timelines happening in a lot of the paintings. Like it feels like the fairy's happening in a different time than maybe this school play being like the backdrop to it. And that's happening in like a few of the other paintings for me too.
You mentioned humor being used in her work. Do you see any other pieces amongst the exhibition where she is clearly playing on that wordplay or that humor in all the layers that she is addressing?
Obviously, these are chickens crossing the road, which is a pop culture reference. I think roosters are a big part of her practice, and so you see them as a motif in a lot of her work. But I think the literal chicken crossing the road is pretty funny. I am curious, though, to see like what other people's thoughts are about kind of the figures that are in the background and what you kind of make of this almost pop arty graphic design element to the piece. If anybody has any thoughts on that, I'm curious.
I was thinking about the 90s with this, and it looks like composition notebook kind of like texture to it and like lined paper. So it kind of seems like it's something that maybe happened around this time for her. But yeah, I don't know if they're maggots or rice or composition notebook scatter. I don't really know, but it has like a very Nickelodeon sort of Slime Time Live aesthetic for me.
So there is rice.
Yeah. I was thinking also about how you're not supposed to throw rice at weddings anymore because when pigeons eat it, they explode. Yeah. It's like dangerous for birds but obviously they love to eat it. So it seems like another layer of this joke of like the birds in danger. Yeah. Stupid. Sorry.
It's actually kind of on the nail, though. Oh, really? Yeah. So it is actually, she revisits this theme of painting cocks or roosters throughout her practice, and she has actually created an arbitrary rule for herself that every time that she does one of these pieces, she's going to use rice. And it was back when she was studying in New York and Columbia, she went outside and she just was like, why is there rice all of a sudden? And it was pest control for pigeons. And it was also the same year that she got engaged. So again, that idea of throwing rice in a celebratory moment. Yeah.
Very playful with Allison Katz touch and her four self-portrait images around, kind of cartoonish and illustrated, but yet painterly like. Yes.
Yeah, just hearing how you talked about your paintings, it almost seems like these could be different things cut out from different sources and glued together.
Yes, it seems like there's paper glued on there or as a canvas, but also seems like the beach sand around the corners of the border, like 3-inch, 4-inch.
Yeah, what is on the edges there?
Yeah. Stucco, sandpaper.
What is that? It's suede? Cement. Now we're all afraid to get close. Yeah.
It's very 3D too.
Yeah.
Yes.
The opening looks like it's one of those happy, sad sort of like gestures from performing art. And you're like looking out through that sort of perspective. That's what I'm getting from it with all of these like almost Judy doll corners here. It's really creepy. But yeah, that's what I'm getting from this one.
I like that. I hadn't seen that. I found that cut out a very strange shape, but it does feel like a theater mask.
Yeah. I think it is Venice, right? Maybe?
To me, it kind of looks like one of the shapes of, I don't know what they're called, but when you go to a tourist location and they have like the eyeglasses that you can like pay a quarter and look into it.
The binoculars and
Yeah, the binoculars. That's kind of the shape it's giving me.
You know, her paint handling reveals, going from very loose to extremely tight brushwork. And it tells you that she's able to command and she has studied precisely, how those brushstrokes in art history are linked together.
Yeah, I think this one of the balcony, for me, it reminds me of like a Vermeer painting of a view of the Netherlands, and it feels very historical, which makes it all the more funny that it's the facade of this building. It's like this super compression of time and like kind of isolating of style, but then also those paintings are so small and this is so large. It's like just very playful.
Especially because it's like a balcony to nowhere, you just walk in and like, where are you supposed to go? A lot of voids happening in a lot of these paintings. I think it's theatrical, much like this one is theatrical, I think. And she's playing with those things, with the trompe l'oeil.
Yeah, those two specifically are also very like cinematic, and they almost feel like backdrops for like a film, or like you could film or perform something in front of them, or like, standing within the balcony, so you can kind of like place something in there as if it's like a green screen.
What about the painting itself? Painters. thick painting, thin painting. I'm struck by how tidy the edges of the paintings are. How do you imagine Allison's studio to be? A neat studio, a messy studio, or her process? What could you extrapolate about the making of the work itself from what is here?
I think because of the strong perspective in each one and the kinds of material she's using and how differently everything's painting, I expect it to be very clean. And I feel like she probably works on one at a time, maybe because the materials are so different. I have no idea.
Maybe sketches it out and then executes it. It doesn't seem like it's like a very intuitive process. It seems more like conceptual.
Like it's not happening on the canvas, it's happening.
It's happening in her mind, and then the canvas is like a translation of what's happening in her mind.
Yeah, I would agree.
I know that balcony is somewhere in London where she was resigning for a couple months, but also just in general, like appreciating the spacing of this exhibition and this gallery, because I've noticed that in this side of the exhibition, there are always figures, whether it be a chicken or a self-portrait. But on that side of the exhibition, that spot, those spaces are reserved for more architectural and just like background scenes without any figures within it, which I thought was interesting. And I just feel like she's really appreciating just spaces in general, whether it be like where she traveled or lived in, or how she portrays her artwork.
And there's a kind of pictorial narrative that's unfolding, going from this sort of the frames to the figures. And then you pointed out that when we were on the other side of the mural, that it's the most abstract painting and loosest. So there's also almost like feels like a progression of the painting itself in terms of representation. So writing is something that Allison says is very important for her. She does a lot of writing in the studio, I guess as much as painting in the studio. Is writing important for anybody's practice here? And if so, how?
Actually, it's interesting. I'm actually working on some paintings which could be potentially the antithesis of writing.
As she's journaling her life, I feel that she's just recalling what she's been seeing, and I feel that when she's in her gallery, she just unleashes her inner thoughts, and she writes them down, and she's painting her dreams and the subconscious and bringing it to reality. Her paintings, it feels really dreamlike, her paintings, and I feel that, like on this painting, she's like writing down what she's gonna paint, and I think that's really good as a painter myself. Like when I write a proposal, I'm gonna write something, and it helps me to paint that next painting.
I think writing also goes into her titles. I know we've mentioned a couple of them already, so I can share a few. Like that one over there is called Catwalk. The sheep one in the front entrance is called Sheepish. This one's Venice Peaches. So she's like using that creative writing again to bring in that humor that she likes to explore, to bring in that play on words. What do you feel like those titles, now that you know a few of them, like do they add to the piece?
I think that fits in with this sheepish title, now that I know the title. Like you can see her hand kind of peeking out from behind the structure, and it's almost like she's in Somerset, like looking at like LA and like kind of being sheepish. So maybe like also how she doesn't use her real name in writing. So
I feel like these two titles stuck out the most to me, because if that one's like, why did the chicken cross the road? It's a question, and then the titles don't ask. So I think that that's kind of like a play with the viewer. And then the tad naive is like a tadpole is a baby, and she's young, and tad naive, like it's a play on words, but also talks about like the naivete of being like a teenager, maybe in Hollywood, getting your like first photos taken. Maybe you're naive about where you're gonna go with them, or just kind of that experience. So I think that there's a very personal connection to the titles, and I think that connects to what you were talking about earlier with the writing. And maybe that is her way of like bringing her writing into her works, even if it's not super explicit. It's more of like a personal humor, it seems almost.
Can I ask what the title of the triptych is?
The triptych is called Responding.
Sorry, I also had a question about what's the title of the Pompeii bodies one right here? Are these two?
The diptych is called Sleeping and Weeping in the Fourth.
I guess I think that title, to continue, is interesting because I may be mistaken, but from what I know about like Pompeii wall painting, I think they're categorized by styles, like first style, second style, potentially. So I feel like fourth style might be a play on that, and kind of other people were talking about how she plays with time a lot in her work, and I feel like maybe fourth style is her bringing history into the present or something along those lines and playing with the time. And then Sleeping and Weeping is a reference, I think, to like the actual position of the body and how this person must have died, and just kind of a reminder of the fact that the people in history that we study were real people who had lives that were lost in like a tragic way, and this is kind of just an imprint of that.
Just thinking about titles, I was thinking about the title for this exhibition, and I'm wondering if you could speak, someone could speak to my question being, like what pieces were made while she was preparing for this exhibition, knowing that this was going to be the title, and which ones were made before she knew that she was going to do this exhibition. And like, because I think that a title can say a lot about an exhibition, and there's like some pieces up here that are like, I think, if I'm not mistaken, were made while she was like knowing that she was going to do an exhibition here at Hauser Wirth. And I'm just like fascinated how those might relate to the ones that were made before she, began this exhibition.
My understanding is that Allison's work is always site responsive, and so all of the works were made for this exhibition. So both ones that were like very specifically have something of Hollywood or California or Venice, makes you think of Venice, California, but then she's also bringing kind of where she's at in her own life and work, that she spent time in Pompeii and she spent time in Somerset. So it's all kind of comes together in the construct of the show. And the way like the show is like a big montage machine. The pieces come together and they spark their own associations now that they're all here together in West Hollywood.
And also the title of the exhibition, Westward Ho, is a triple reference. You have Westward Ho, which is the town in England. It's the only one with the exclamation point. The second reference is the 19th century novel by Charles Kingsley, and I'm very curious because that's a highly problematic text. And then the third one would be Samuel Beckett's very existential response to it's a parody of Kingsley's work, but it's a novel fundamentally about existential failure, which again, the idea of humor, like I think there's something very postmodern about everything here with the pastiche, but there's like this tension between like succeeding in communication, but the deliberate failure of communication with all the double entendres, visual tropes being, messed around with. So I think it's interesting that the title of the show has, a very literary bent, but corresponds with the visual aspects.
Thank you, everybody, for bringing it. Yeah.